Welcome to Lead Poison.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Lead Poison podcast, brought to you by youcanpaint.com.au. Please head to youcanpaint.com.au for issue 1 of their how-to series, How to Paint Your House and Save Thousands. My name is Jack, and this evening on the show we are joined by the host of the Toy Division podcast. The Toy Division podcast is an incredible show that digs deep into the murky waters of mental health and the incredible diversity of the graffiti culture. The host, who is my guest today, combines his love for graffiti and the universally shared desire to live a more positive and fulfilling life. He does so through insightful and practical conversations with a wide range of guests from all across the globe. As an Australian, I'm thankful people like him are reaching our shores and exploring spaces not often ventured into. If the Lead Poison podcast interests you in the slightest, then I highly suggest you listen to the Toy Division podcast, which can be found on Spotify or any other podcast platform. I thoroughly enjoyed our discussion and genuinely got a lot out of it. Of course, I hope you do as well. Without any further delay, please welcome Why don't you tell me where you're originally from and how long you've been in Australia?
Right, so I grew up in England, otherwise sometimes referred to as the UK, but my Scottish friend often reminds me it's not the UK, it's England. Let's differentiate between Wales, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and in the Republic of Ireland. Anyway, I often will tell people that aren't really very familiar with England that I'm from the outskirts of London, but Londoners can be very very rigid about describing where I'm from as London. And one of the most funny lines which gets quoted to me, people that have listened to Toy Division or whatever, is the one person them saying, what's your accent from? Where are you from? Because I lived in Bristol for a long time. It's a different accent, and I had someone they go, "Where are you from, bruv?" He obviously heard my accent, a little bit different from that West Country kind of accent. I said, "Oh, outskirts of London." He goes, "Where?" And I told him. He was like, "Bruv, that ain't London, bruv." And it was like this moment, and he's actually a real king of the UK scene. It was one of those moments where you've just been like, yeah, I've just been burned. Fair enough. But I said it on an episode ages ago. And, I've got a mate he just sends me voice messages going, "Hey, London, bruv." I'm like, all right, I know. So it's proper outskirts. It was bumpkin. There was, like trees and like fields and stuff, which is very bumpkin. If you're from an inner city London, it's like a tree on your street. That's bumpkin. But I lived in an area where, to the kind of the untrained eye, there wasn't a huge amount of graffiti. There was little bits that you might see, but when you haven't had that veil lifted, when you haven't really started noticing it, you might not really kind of see anything. There was a couple of writers, like there was a piece that someone had done, a ninja piece on a disused hospital kind of site that we used to walk past. We're like, wow, that's amazing, what's that? But then getting into skateboarding, and I know this is a common theme with many people, is that the skateboarding path into graffiti writing or graffiti culture is a common one, because again, they're quite intricately related, aren't they? And, you start traveling. Like I was, we skated a lot in like car parks and stuff like that in our little town. And then my mate was like, "Oh, there's this skate park up in London called PlayStation." We're like, whoa, what? It's like the computer game thing. They're like, yeah, it's sponsored by Sony, PlayStation. So anyway, got a train up to London Waterloo, which is one of the big stations in London. That was a direct train. So, and then going to the skate park, which is in Ladbroke Grove. I think I've told this story in different episodes of different podcast stuff, but it always, and again, who knows how reliable memory is? memory is really unreliable. So, but this is my recollection. I remember seeing a massive fume DDS piece. And for maybe people in different parts of the world don't know who DDS are, DDS is one of the most probably well-known long-term hardcore crews in the UK. So writers like Fume, Shoe 2, Sub, Bosch, Zonk, Koza, like a lot of kings, like real kings and different generations of that. Teach, how can I forget Teach? And seeing that giant Fume piece, and it was not just it's not just big, it was huge. It was, you know, seeing it on the London Underground, coming out from underground, and then being on that overground bit and just seeing it. And I remember it just really stuck in my mind. Then seeing other things where it said Fume, and I started noticing it and getting this kind of awareness of, that looks like the same thing. Bear in mind, I was from an area where there wasn't really any graffiti culture. There was no writers, really. But then over the period of about 6 months to a year, a ton of people had started getting into graph. So it was like this little town we were living in, all the kids skating, well, not all of them, but a lot of the kids skating suddenly were tagging and doing tags. And there was a graffiti magazine from the UK, which I think a lot of people will recognize the name, Graffitism. And that was like a red rag to a bull for many of us, because it had like pictures of panels and whole cars and track sides. We're like, what is this? And then they've got bits in there from like Europe, like France, Germany. Like, what? This is crazy. And then starting to, I don't know how old you are, but like Tower Records, like going to Tower Records and like getting Graffitism. And I went in there and there was this VHS video, and it was like, what's this? I was picked up, it's like from Paris, Dirty Hands 2. I was like, Dirty Hands? What could that be? Anyway, bought it, paid for it, not realizing that Tower Records and all the areas where there's like the graph mags, there's loads of tags. And I thought, oh, it's because they come here and buy them. That's not, they just rack stuff. But I was never much of a racker. You know, my family background is actually, and I've admitted this to people, I got a lot of stick for this. I'm actually from a family where both my dad and my stepmom were both police. So I was doing this very much under the radar. They were still police when I was doing all this stuff. So then getting that VHS back to my mate's house, and it's just like, put that video in, and there's that slow motion sort of intro, and there's the it's like the get the fuck up, and it's then doing that panel, and then it's got that o'clock bit where he's in the train bombing, and mate, from there that was basically it. That was a wrap. So
the rest is history.
That's my, yeah, and a lot has happened since then. But then to answer your other question, so I moved to Australia in about 2015. So I finally went to uni in my late 20s, early 30s. Actually became a stand-up member of the community after a long period of hard drug and alcohol abuse, brain injury, accidental overdoses, all these sorts of things. But I've got myself on the right path, and I've got family who live in Australia, in Sydney. So I moved there on kind of a bit of a whim. I came on holiday. Well, I went on holiday to Sydney after I finished my degree, and my dad lives there. And I was like, I don't really want to go back to England, because I was living in a really shitty flat, working in a hospital, I was getting crap wages. He's like, we'll just move here then. Oh, all right. 6 years down the line, I've now moved from Sydney to Melbourne. I've married someone who's Australian, who she grew up here her whole life, and I'm not making any plans to go back to England. Not specifically because it's a bit of a shit show at the moment, but I'm very happy living in Australia. The weather definitely helps as well. Although people are taking the piss and then saying, "You've moved to Melbourne though."
Yeah.
Like, Melbourne weather ain't great, and I'm like,
4 seasons in one day.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I'm like, mate, I grew up somewhere where it's cold. Like, it's cold a lot of time of year. It's raining. It's the unpredictability of the weather here where it just confuses me. You're like, you go out wearing shorts and t-shirt and you're coming back needing to wear a ski suit. But anyway, typical English person, I'm talking about the weather.
Yeah, for sure, man. No, I mean, I guess it plays a big role. Did you meet your partner over here, or was there a connection before you came?
that we met, and this is not something that's like embarrassing. Like 10 years ago, you'd be like, oh, they met on the internet, they must be a couple of perverts. But now we met on, like, I can't remember what it's called. It's like one of the most popular dating apps. And I'd been going on a lot of dates. And one thing I found was, again, I've never been much of a Romeo sort of guy. I'm quite, even though I'm quite outgoing, I'm quite like, you know, not super confident, not had massive romantic history. Anyway, moved here, and just my voice, my accent was almost like, it took me up from like maybe a level 2 or 3 normally in relation to stuff, not just looks, but personality wise. Suddenly, I was getting all these like proper success dates.
Yeah, for sure.
It was like, my voice is something unique.
Yep.
I'm like, I'll run with that. That's fine.
Fucking oath, man.
So,
yeah, any point of difference, man, always works with the ladies for sure.
And vice versa.
Yes.
As I know, I've got a couple of friends who are in the UK, and they're like, oh, any guy with a French accent. Or in the flip reverse, I've got a couple of mates who originally, they've grown up in England, they're now married to Aussies or Kiwis or vice versa. So something a bit different, not just the norm. I'm hoping that the person who's now my wife, she doesn't kind of realise that it's just an accent.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you got a lot more to offer than that, mate, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a typical English personality trait, like really self-deprecating,
yeah, for sure.
Like, no, don't give yourself, it's like, stop being so bloody English. You'll be a citizen here soon. Kind of get a bit more Aussie pride in you.
It's in your blood, mate. It's in your blood.
Yeah.
So I mean, you said you moved here in 2015. And it sounds like you're involved, you know, to whatever level into graffiti before you came here. Was there, you know, was it a surprise coming here and seeing the culture here of graffiti? Was it different to what you expected? Were you already aware of what it was like? You know, when I went over to New York many, many years ago, and people were asking me ridiculous questions about Australia, and just their, you know, obviously that's a pretty general statement, but their worldview of what Australia was like was, you know, fairly outback-ish and kangaroos and whatnot. And it was just a bit of a surprise to see that they didn't really have any idea what it was like here. Was it surprising to you when you got here in terms of graffiti?
Well, yes and no. So I'll kind of unpack that a little bit, because I've been coming here. So I first came here, so I'm now in my late 30s. So I came here on like a supposed like year, only lasted a month, after a brawl with a girls' hockey team from the US. That's a long story, but anyway. Yeah, I'll tell people that, they're like, yeah, don't tell that full story. But I'd come in when I was 19, and, you know, I had an awareness. And I guess the other thing is the context that we've got is, growing up in the UK, you know, the London Underground is like the system to do. And I did panels. Like, I never really got into metro systems, but I was pretty much almost like, you know, someone that only smokes bongs. And they're like, people that smoke spliffs, wimps. So I was like the bong smoking version of like graphics, like panels only, trains only, anyone doing legals, wimps, tracksides, wimps, street bombing, wimps. Actually, now you know that street bombing is actually one of the most dodgy, but anyway, that's another thing. But obviously we'd have this influx of these names popping up on the London Underground, and the London Underground was things like you could not do it. Like, you needed to be DDS, or you needed to be, because the level of security, because of the IRA bombings in a lot of train stations and in London, the whole troubles that were happening in Northern Ireland and spilling over to the UK, because that was the thing I grew up with. There was the risk of bombings, and you'd hear about bombings and things on TV and people being shot. I mean, that was normally happening in Northern Ireland, but again, there was quite a lot of bombings that were happening. So that level of fear was definitely there. And again, you're a child, your parents, if they're switched on, I think, let's not let our 4 or 5-year-old watch the news about people being executed and blown up. But I don't think my parents were that switched on. They're like, hey, too young. Anyway, so the level of security of the London Underground was seen as so high, and there was a lot of like, the system's too tough, the system's too tough. And then there was a few names that started to pop up. And again, think back to when this was like late 90s, early 2000s. We weren't seeing what was happening. It's not like the Instagram era, or you weren't seeing like footage of runners. You weren't seeing that. And you're like, and then we started to notice that flicks were popping up on some of the early kind of websites like Location 12. So Location 12 was the first ever thing I can remember. It's like daily updates of Graph, and that was after something called Enigma, which was like a monthly magazine. And then before that, there was Digital Jungle, which was like a database. So that's still online. So if anyone wants to dive into the old school, just look up www.graffiti.org/DJ, and Location 12, Enigma, and Digital Jungle are all still on there. And there's hundreds, if not thousands of flicks. So I always go off on tangents, but we started to notice these names pop up, like Corpse, Banos, Pubes. And I remember thinking, what is that style? Like, what is that? That looks kind of like you, because there was this whole thing about Euro style, which kind of makes me crack shits, because it's like Europe's a whole bloody continent. It's not just a style, but we can always go into that. And I remember seeing these names pop up, and I'd been to Sydney, I said when I was 19, but that was a very short trip. I did paint a little bit. I'd been up the coast, so I'd done Sydney, went to Brisbane for a bit, went up to Nimbin for a Mardi Gras, met a writer there. Shout out to that writer. I don't know if he listens to this. It was Dwell, I think he wrote, and just randomly met up with him. I was well into smoking weed at that point because I thought it was super cool and wouldn't fuck up my mental health, which it eventually did. We did a piece together, and I started to get this idea that the Australian scene was, it existed. And I remember we didn't go on trains that much, but I remember seeing like roadsides, wow, these styles kind of look different. Because back then you didn't really have much to go on. You didn't really have much info. Not a lot of UK graph mags had like Aussie panels or Aussie tracksides and stuff like that. And then that trip, it was the first time I ever used a chisel tip cap, because I just bought a can of, I think it must have been like Export or something. And I was like, yeah. I mean, I was in like Nimbin, like, yeah, I'm getting up, I'm abroad. And I remember just thinking, what the hell is up with the tip? Like, what's, and trying to find things like actual, what I would call, snazzy Euro paint. So like Belton, Molotow, Montana. We couldn't find it. So that was my only exposure then. But then over this time, my awareness of Australian graffiti, because, people like the King Banos just opened people's eyes. And then gradually over time, I think I got a couple of, because I'm a mega graph nerd, I'm happy to admit that. I think I managed to get a copy of Dirty Deeds or something like that. I can't really remember. It's a distant memory now. And I remember just looking through it being like, oh, people do stuff in Melbourne and Sydney. And there's like double-decker trains. So over that time, I started to develop more of an awareness of the scene in Australia. And I've got a pal who I still kind of write with now. He came over, shout out to this guy, like 17 years old, comes all the way from Melbourne to the UK, and he's like, take me to do panels, just chuck something on 12-ounce profit. Anyone want to go and do legal walls? But then he started to kind of educate me. And then when I came here again to visit family, I came to Melbourne. And then he was giving me the down low on all the writers. And I guess to then go full circle and actually answer the question is, I think over a period of time before I got here, because I was 31, 32 when I moved here, I was quite aware of the various scenes. I guess mostly Melbourne, Brisbane. I knew of DTS, and I'd seen like Soffle's stuff and just being blown away. And another time when I came here traveling, actually that same time, I remember being in Brisbane and seeing some of the DTS stuff and WTCs and just being like, these styles are insane. Like, that kind of organic, if anyone's listening to this, they're probably thinking, yeah, I know what you're talking about, that, but almost where it looked kind of like alive, like the style, but it was then on panels. And I'm like, how the fuck do they get enough time to do that? Because I'd only thought you get like quick. And I remember seeing all this stuff. So when I then moved to Sydney, I had an awareness, but knowing specific writers, knowing like who's up, who's doing stuff, who's on the lines, I didn't really know. And the great thing is now, I'm now doing exactly that same kind of newbie awareness of graph in Melbourne. And again, that's a whole other kettle of fish, because trying to then work out who's who in Melbourne. I'm getting there, but Melbourne is hammered.
Yeah, I've heard. I've been there briefly for just a couple of months. I went and lived there for a little bit, but yeah, obviously Melbourne is smashed, isn't it?
But I mentioned that to people that lived here their whole life. They're like, you should have been here 10, 15 years ago, mate. That's when it was really hammered.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what would it have been like 10 or 15 years ago? But anyway, so
pieces over pieces and yeah, craziness. How does aside from some of the sort of really well-known writers, but how does the majority of Australian graphs sort of stack up internationally in terms of style and technical skill?
Very good question. One thing I always noticed very much was that Australia had a hell of a lot of style for an island. It's a big island, but it's very kind of out the way. It's like on literally the other side of the world where I grew up. But I always remember seeing these very intricate wild styles, these very precise kind of styles, and seeing then actually seeing the train stuff that happened, the history there. Because again, I'm a mega graph nerd. So I'll sit and look through mags and I'll be like trying to find this and trading flicks and all that type of stuff. But always I've thought that Australian style, the style from Australia, and I know there's multiple styles, there's not just the style. But what I found was, and I don't know if I'm right with this, I would speculate that because Australia was quite isolated, the influences were quite, not necessarily limited, but it's one thing I really noticed is, some of the big crews that I seen the history of in Sydney, say crew like OSF, very, very clear influence from the traditional, say, subway art sort of era. That very New York kind of style, amazing letters. And also I then talk to people and they go, oh, there's a Sydney style. And I kind of see what they mean. But then I've also had people say, Sydney's only got one style. And I'm like, nah, come on, hang on. I was like, have you been to Sydney in the last 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if I'm just completely biased, but Australian style for me has always been impressive. But the thing that's always impressed me the most is how, I can swear, right?
Yeah, of course, mate.
Probably already have.
Yeah.
I've been so fucking blown away at how active Aussie panel writers are. They're like, I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go there, and I'm going to go and smash London, and I'll go and smash here, and I'll go and smash there. Like, I've always loved that because it's not a short trip, man.
No, fuck no.
Get to Europe. I mean, even getting to New Zealand is 4 hours, I think. Probably a bit longer from different parts of Australia. But I've always loved that. Like, there's these scenes that have obviously developed without necessarily the internet influence. And again, I know that's most graph scenes, but I really have found that I really like the work ethic and the fact that people like Banos and Corpse and Pubes and Dorps basically just came to London and just showed everyone how to really do it. Like top to bottom colour hole cars, I know they were getting done, but I don't think they were getting done to that level. I might be totally wrong. I do actually have an issue of Subway Net magazine from 2001. And there's a TPG, Transit Poltergeists special, all about the London Underground.
Wow.
So it's Banos, Pubes, Corpse, the person that writes Moas or Vims, that's a different writer's name, but I won't say their name on here. Krell, Jugs, and it's and my mate actually had it. I lent it to him. You know, one of those mags that you maybe lend to someone, and then you're like, it's gone.
Yeah, you're not getting that back.
Now, 20 years later, literally, no, like 18, yeah, probably about 20 years later, I met up with him, went to the pub, and he's like, oh, I've got something for you. I was like, oh, what is it? He goes, oh, you know that Subway Net mag you lent me like 20 years ago? And I'm like, sick, thanks, mate. And it's literally still in pristine condition. So shout out to him.
Wow.
Because, yeah, and that was, I mean, it was just exciting as well, because I have family links in Australia. Then seeing that graph is done to this level and how, again, I don't know why I would assume this, but I also love the fact there's a very strong New Zealand scene as well, and how I'm sure they influenced each other. From what I've heard, there was a lot of influence because they're quite close and people of different, backgrounds, because it's a bit easier to move to Australia and New Zealand and vice versa than it is to come from other countries, because I know it was different years ago, but getting a visa or to stay here is really difficult because before COVID, the big elephant in the room, Australia was a very desirable place to move to, and it still is.
Yeah, I don't know anything about New Zealand graffiti actually. Now that you mention that, I haven't really thought about it too much. But I guess you're right. There would be a crossover for sure, being that they're so close.
Yeah, and I actually, when I was here once traveling, I didn't have a work visa, so you have to. This is the madness of the Australian visa. Even if you're on a holiday visa, it can only last 3 months, but then you have to actually leave the country after 3 months and then come back.
I've heard about this, yeah.
So I went to New Zealand. I went to Auckland for like 3 nights. Good old 12-ounce profit days. Put a message on there. Oh, I'm coming to Auckland. Any writers available to meet up with? And I went and painted tracksides with these guys in Auckland. And I'd found this thing in one of the stores. It was like party pills. And I was like, what the fuck are these? I was like, maybe New Zealand's got like more relaxed drug laws. Yeah, I'll do these. Just caffeine tablets, basically.
No dose or something, yeah. 300 milligrams of caffeine. Keep you awake for the 3 days.
Yeah, and I remember just seeing the tracksides were crushed, like really hammered. And also seeing what I've now been informed is a style called straights. So more of an influence. And I listened to a podcast because I did an episode ages ago with someone. If anyone's listened to it, it's the one with the disguised voice, but he kind of gave me a bit of an overview of what straights style is. And I then found a podcast, the one with podcasts, with a guy who pretty much brought that style. So he moved to LA for a bit because his family are like, he needs to chill out. Again, probably not realizing how raggo LA actually is. But then he got influenced by that sort of, that style, maybe that more Latino sort of gang sort of style. I don't quite know the term. But then he brought that back, and that then became a style and still is in New Zealand. A lot of people that do straights, so it's very much, we've been using that chisel tip to do very straight lines and kind of interconnected blocks. Most of the people that do that a lot don't actually do pieces. It's all about like bombing and big tags, almost kind of, like the Philly sort of style, where it's all about hand styles. So anyway, I'm going off on a tangent.
No, go ahead, man, by all means. That's what this is all about.
The wonders of graffiti.
The wonders of graffiti.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's probably things which, if I dedicated as much time and effort to in my life, I'd be rolling in it. But you know what? I think graph's enough for me. And that's why I love the fact I did Toy Division. It was on a whim. But again, like conversations with you, listening to your podcast, and I always shout out other podcasts because it's sometimes you're not aware of the other ones, So like F24, Bench Talk, the Graffiti Machine, like all these podcasts. Oh yeah, of course, Beers Beats the Biz, Legends Thursday. That was the first ever graph podcast I ever found, Legends Thursday, by Coop from the US. And I think I've been into graph since I was like 15, 16. I'm in my late 30s, and I'm not planning on ever giving up or slowing down or whatever. But I think having the access to podcasts, they're very different discussions than just the latest one-up thing. And obviously the latest one-up thing is dope. And actually, literally while we're recording this, I don't know if you've seen it, when they're in Sydney.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, I have seen a little bit of stuff online. Yeah, I was wondering what was going on with that.
And it's a disguised voice. It's like, oh, we realised that there's the new Sydney Metro and it's very difficult to do, but we wanted to give it a go. We had 20 seconds on the back jump, so we thought we'd use a fire extinguisher. And it's literally them just walking up to the Metro with a fire extinguisher. Because when they said they were doing it, I was like, oh my God, is there actually going to be footage of the Sydney Metro getting painted? I'm getting all G'd up and hyped. I'm like, yes, because I know it's really difficult to do. And it's like a fire extinguisher. And I was like, well, that's still good. But I really like the way they're like, we need to do this system no matter what. So, yeah. Shout out to One Up, because if there's anything to inspire people, there's something like One Up. But I think that can set the bar very, 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 very high.
Extremely high. Yeah, those dudes are on another level, man. They're
Don't bother doing a trackside. Just do a 7-person whole train in 4 minutes.
Yeah, paint the top of a fucking skyscraper or whatever. Those dudes are pushing the limits for sure, man. Tell me about, you just mentioned, obviously you're the creator of the Toy Division podcast. Tell me about sort of the origin story of that sort of project. How did that come about? When did you decide that you wanted to start a podcast and talk about graffiti? And more importantly, I think talk about a lot of the other things that I'd like to get into with you that you discuss on the podcast, which was a really nice surprise for me. And I'm sure it is for a lot of other people as well. But firstly, tell me sort of how that came about.
All right. And this is the thing, I think people, and I like these questions, these are really good questions. So to give a bit of context, I've had mental health problems since I was very young. So like 11 years old sort of thing, for many reasons. Suicidal ideation when I was 11. And as I said earlier, I was kind of brushed over long-term periods of drug and alcohol problems, like not really ever getting onto things like heroin or crack or meth or whatever, but I definitely have done them and thankfully never got hooked, because I think that could have been the end for me. But, I was a hard drinker and a hard recreational drug addict. And I had many years of, being hospitalized because of physical injury and all that type of stuff. So anyway, that just gives a bit of context. And I don't quite know what it was related to. Well, I kind of do, but again, because I'm an occupational therapist and I've worked in the mental health field now for 10 plus years, and it's never just one thing. People say, what was the trigger? And it's like, it's not that fucking simple. There's so many variables which can influence how we react to situations. But to then actually get onto the actual subject of how it started, COVID happened basically, and I've been doing quite well with my, since I moved to Australia. I don't think it was a conscious decision why I moved here, but essentially it was kind of necessary for me to move away from the environment and the people where I was doing a lot of drugs. And I've done very well with my recovery. I've had some relapses, got addicted to benzos, but then I've had the support of my wife and gone to therapy. Actually started going to therapy myself. Even though I'm a qualified therapist, I thought it was like weak to go and need therapy. Even though I'm a qualified therapist who worked with people and was very empathic, I thought that I needed to be perfect or able to deal with things. And then, I was doing pretty well. And then COVID happened. And I don't know if it was, and again, thoughts can be subconscious and conscious. They can be something we're aware of. Again, it's very individual, but I basically started to get really suicidal. Probably, I can't quite remember when it would have been, probably the beginning of 2020, I think. And it got to the point where I've been having really intense suicidal ideation. So I've had suicidal ideation. So if people don't know what that is, basically thinking of suicide, and not just a fleeting thought of maybe I could kill myself, actually really thinking it through, thinking of different ways that I could end my life. And thinking and I've never had it, I've always had the thoughts, but I've never had the planning. I was like, shall I throw myself in front of a train? Shall I do a drug overdose? Shall I hang myself? And I started to have these feelings of kind of really intense, and I wasn't medicating, so I wasn't drinking heavily and using drugs, which can often be a problem if you've used those as coping strategies in your life. If they're taken away, that can be really intense, because of course they're not beneficial long term, but they've been the best option you've had for a long time. So I was sober, dealing with the COVID stuff, and I couldn't work. So I was really struggling to do my work. So I was I couldn't even deal with getting out of bed. So I was having those warning signs where I was dreading every day. And then it got to the point where I actually got everything ready to kill myself. I found something there was an old shredder we had in our house. I cut off the plug wire sort of thing with a pair of scissors. I wrote a suicide note. I put a note on the garage door telling my partner, actually now my wife, saying, don't come in here, ring the police, I'm sorry. And I wrote a suicide note, and I was just walking around the garage. She was out for a walk. It was perfect time, excellent, okay. I'm walking around the garage, okay, where can I hang this from? Where can I hang this from? I was yeah, okay, yeah. And I couldn't find anything that was going to take my weight. There wasn't anything, and this is how it's scary, because it wasn't a rash thought. It was I was obviously thought this, I was thinking this through very clearly. I was what could I hang myself from? And I worked out something on the roller door. I was okay, yeah. And then I kind of hung on it. I grabbed onto it with my hand, and it kind of nearly gave way. And I was oh no, that's not gonna do it. And I'm kind of looking around, and then I had this fleeting thought of, actually, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to do this? Probably not. And I rang my partner. I rang her. I was like, I need you to come home right now. And I'm really honest. We're really open and honest with each other. We always have been, which is probably why we're now married. And thankfully, that didn't happen. Again, that wasn't the end of that. I really, really struggled mental health wise for a long period of time in 2020. Okay, so that sets the scene. That was the mindset I was in. But what it really did was it made me really reflect. When I was feeling mentally well enough again, it helped me to really reflect on what is important in my life. And the thing that's very important is doing things that are meaningful. What is meaningful? You can almost hear my thought process here. What's meaningful? Graffiti. What also do I find meaningful? Podcasts. And then through my work, because everyone was in kind of like a lockdown, using Zoom, suddenly I realized, shit me, I could just record conversations with people. I could just record a conversation or a chat. Now, in a former life, well, not really a former life, but I've tried to be a MC and a producer since I was about 19. So I've got all the kit as well. I've got all the stuff, but I just never actually did anything with it. So I had all the kit ready to go, and I thought, why don't I just start a podcast, but do something that's like a little bit different? So originally the whole point was meant to be, because I was thinking names, I was like, and I talked to a friend, shout out to my mate Snow. We had this conversation when he was visiting Sydney, and we were saying, those embarrassing stories, you rarely hear the mega embarrassing stories. You might hear the like, yeah, I went and did like a panel and like we got away and we got chased and all this type of stuff. But I've often been really like interested in those early days stories, when you're like completely clueless, like you don't know what you're doing, you do the dumbest stuff, you like do a piece over someone else's, and then you're like, well, why are they tracking me down and want to kick the shit out of me? But those early days, those early toy stories, but like toys, everyone was going, call it Toy Stories. I was like, I don't know, Toy Stories. And then there's a certain British band, and Toy Division is a play on words of that band, because I've always been a massive fan of that band. The other thing I wanted to do as well was, in this era of graffiti being on the internet, you get to see people's faces. You kind of know what Revoke looks like. You kind of know what, I'm trying not to say Coke too, because I was like, oh, I hate that guy. But you know what a lot of writers' faces look like. And also there's a lot of coverage of like, this is footage of Soffles painting. And you're like, that's amazing. But when I was first starting out, what I really loved about graffiti, what I still love now, is the anonymity, like not knowing who someone is, not knowing what they look like. And that's why I tried to make it anonymous, both because people were then telling really embarrassing stories, but also then making it anonymous. And then from there, it's kind of evolved. And like I said to you before we start recording, I think I've had people go like, yo, you must be so active because you never reveal what your face looks like. I'm not active. I'm not that active at all. I've done stuff in the past where I don't necessarily want people to work out who I am. But that anonymity and that not needing to necessarily be the center of attention, although I then get told, well, you love being the center of attention. I'm like, yeah, but anonymous wise, that's what's then turned into Toy Division. So people don't necessarily know what I look like, because I don't really do illegal stuff that much anymore, if at all. I never actually write the same word. So I do like mates' names, upside down words, back to front words, like random words I picked out of a hat, a mate's birthday, whatever. So even a pal that I'm in a crew with is like, what is your actual tag again? I don't think I've ever seen it. And we've painted together like 4 or 5 times now. And I've been part of that crew for a while. But then what happened is that in those conversations, I think my experience as a therapist meant that I've always been interested in understanding people and their history and their background and things like trauma, like the big T traumas, small t. And I've always been passionate about understanding, because I'm a recovering drug addict. I've always had empathy for people that have had drug and alcohol problems or mental health problems or physical health, because often there can be that kind of I don't know about you, but this is like, well, fucking sort yourself out, mate. Fucking sort yourself out.
For
Don't be a
sure.
fucking junkie. Don't be a fucking junkie. You're addicted to benzos, dickhead.
A lot more complicated
Method.
than that, isn't it?
And life's complicated. And, I was so scared. I was literally terrified to talk about that sort of stuff. Even though I do it on a daily through work. I was like, I don't think the graph scene's like ready for this. I just don't think it's, and I listened to the Graffiti Machine podcast. That was really good. They did some really good work. Bus and Cub, RIP Cub, and Bus is still doing stuff now, but it's like that quite mature, grown up talk about things. There's a couple of episodes of F24, so the episode with Score TRC and with Puno STD, where they kind of talked about mental health and depression and anxiety. And I was like, I'm going to do it. And it wasn't ever that was the goal of the episode, but it started to come up. And then I didn't really realize it was happening. People were messaging me going, I love the way you're talking about mental health. And I was like, are we? And then I just thought, you know what? Balls to the wall. I'm just going to admit that I've had mental health problems for years and I'm a recovering drug addict and I feel anxious sometimes and I struggle. And I honestly, I was like, this is it. I'm going to be mocked. People stop listening. They'll think I'm some sort of complete pussy. Actually, I've never had one super negative direct message. I've had people go, well, it's not really graph, is it? But the feedback I've had has been mind-bendingly positive, and that just shows there must be a need for these types of conversations or those types of conversations in an often macho, tough person, don't ever admit you need help or you're mentally unwell or whatever. But mate, there's so many people in our scene that are like committing suicide or like heavily addicted to drugs and like feeling like there's no way out. And I think that me having that suicidal ideation for many years, I wanted to create a platform, and it's grown definitely, where people can feel that they're listened to, they belong, and it's not just about being the person who wants to go and do a panel with like racked pain.
That's beautiful, man. It's a beautiful story. And I love that you ended up going down that path, because I mean, just for myself personally, I've found so much value out of your podcast. And as you said, there must be a need for those types of conversations. It sounds like you have, but you've obviously noticed a lot of mental health issues and physical health issues within the graffiti culture and substance abuse and things like that. Is it some reason that it's sort of exaggerated in that particular art form?
That's a very good, these questions are banging. That's a really thought through question as well.
I'm trying. I want to make sure that I give, because I've listened to you've covered a lot of stuff. So I want to make sure that I give you some good angles to talk about.
And sorry to ruin the illusion, but I unless the person specifically demands that I do, I never prep for sessions.
Yeah.
So I'm literally just like off the top of the dome.
Oh, you're good at it, man.
But
you're good at it.
This is why these are good, because it's actually making me think, that's a really, okay. So to then go, I have a divergent type habit as well, like start talking about something else. Okay, so I would suggest, and this is just my interpretation, but I would suggest that someone who gets into graph probably has a feeling that they need to belong. They need to belong to something. And that's why subcultures exist, don't they? They don't exist out of like randomness. Why did punk start? Why did, in inverted commas, hip hop culture start? Why did techno, the rave culture, I don't know, goth culture, like people feel they need to belong. And when you're younger and when you're a bit like very emotionally immature, we often feel like we need to belong and we want to be part of something. Now, that would then suggest that a lot of the people that get into graph are probably missing something in maybe their community or their belonging or their mental well-being, or they felt that they didn't belong in their family. I mean, like I said, two of my parents were cops. Like I was like, and I was getting into smoking weed, and I was actually going from this like very well-behaved, timid kid, because I was super disciplined, to being seen as a pretty bad kid. Like I was the tearaway. And what I found in graffiti for me was that I felt like I was somebody. I had something to like belong. I had this nom de plume, but I had this belonging. It was like this amazing graph culture where it had so much to it and it gave me so much. It was like, I'm traveling here and meeting these people and like running and doing panels. So that's what I was definitely getting out of it. But I think that can really help people to feel part of something. But like I said, when often we seek that, we might be missing like parents that were maybe emotionally available, or we might have had it, we've had trauma, we might have been bullied, ostracized, don't fit in with the inverted commas cool kids, and the cool kids are now the ones that have got like 15 kids and own a mortgage and fucking hate their lives, so fuck them. You can tell I wasn't one of the cool kids.
For sure.
And the thing is that as well is that feeling of belonging, that feeling of being part of a group, there's the social norms that tie in together with that. And the social norms of graph is like, stand your ground, drink, smoke weed, get high, run from the cops, be tough, don't show emotions. Someone takes you out, battle them. So that can then really create this feeling, that psychological thing where we almost transition into being another person. And I found I became like an aggressor because I found subconsciously and probably consciously, I found like I had some power. So if you then think about it with, and again, I know people get into graph for many different reasons, and there's people from all different socioeconomic environments. But when we really think about it, it's like, it must be filling a void for us. It must be filling a void that we feel that we need, and we don't realize it. But then the thing is that the stress, the paranoia, the drama, like smoking shitloads of super high THC skunk weed and doing panels probably ain't that good for remaining calm. And drinking heavily and having terrible sleep and like maybe eating a KFC once every 2 days, or like racking some fucking lollies from the store, or heavily drinking, like you can imagine that it starts to create this whirlwind of it's the norm. And I think back to, and I know things have changed a lot now, but trying to step back, and I even have it now, and I'm happy to admit this, is that I try and be open and honest, and like, I know it's a played out term, but being real. Like, this is who I am. I'm not ashamed of it. I think being quite mature now, that helps, because I'm like, you know what, you don't like it, move on, that's fine. But I think there's a lot of us that are still, it's all a journey. It's not an event. Change is not an event, it's a journey. Stole that off someone by the name of Deb Dana. And that's where I think a lot of us can get locked into this, the graph world, where it's like, I belong, I'm getting something out of this. And then we can become the aggressor or the person that's very active. You know, a lot of these writers that become super, you know, like Rust, for example, from Germany, he was like the king of the Berlin Metro, like the king. Anyone doesn't know who he is, check out Dirty Hands 3, Search and Destroy, like Rust. And then we've also got many writers in many scenes who, you know, graph scenes where I guess graph fills a void temporarily, but does it actually bring that connection and that peace on the inside? I know this sounds like spiritual bullshit, and like I've talked about on the podcast, if someone had said to me, like when I was in that like panels only, yeah, I only do panels, yeah, I only wear tracksuits and like drive around and do panels, yeah, that isn't me. That I was like playing that act because I wanted to be that. I wanted to be somebody. I wanted to be that writer. And then I kind of got out of it and realized, like, that ain't me. That ain't London, bruv. No, that's not me. And being able to realize that you can still be a writer, but you know what? You can be a emotionally available, strong, reliable friend and crew member and partner. And you don't have to be someone who's like, oh, fucking meditation, fuck off. Yoga, fuck off. All these yoga dickheads. Like, mate, that's what I didn't finish it off. I just said, that's not London, bruv. But if someone had told me about getting in touch with my spiritual side, I'd be like, fuck out of here. What are you talking about? And I think that can be reflected in this toxic culture where we live in, where it's all about being perfect and tough and like not showing any emotions. It's like when I was younger, I used to have it, I've got very masculine dad and granddad. Anytime I'd cry, I'd be like, stop being a little girl, don't be a wimp, stick up for yourself. Don't be a wimp. And it's like, you just get taught that. And then when you feed that into a often very, very like tough culture of graph, because it is a street culture that's evolved to become various other things. But like, to show that you're weak, to show that you're not able to hold your ground, is seen as like the worst thing. But you can still stand your ground. If someone tries to roll me at a wall, I'll fucking fight them. But I don't go out looking for fights. You know, I'm still going to stand my ground. I'm not going to be a wimp. But if I've got a mate who's going through some shit, I'm going to be there for him and like listen. And again, I'm super animated here, but I think that's what we're often missing. And in the graph culture, that discussion is happening. But even then, it's still kind of done behind closed doors. You know, it's like, oh, we can't talk about that because that's for fucking pussies, mate. Meditation, pussies. Admitting that you're anxious, pussies. Fucking idiots. And I would speculate the people that are that dismissive, they haven't even started their journey yet. And maybe hearing someone like me or you or whatever talk on these podcasts, they're like, actually, it's all right to kind of not be the tough guy. And I can start believing in myself as a person and getting that real self-esteem, because self-esteem, unfortunately, doesn't come from doing just tons of panels. Well, I'm sure it does help when you're someone that active, but it can be a very empty kind of belonging, and actually finding faith in yourself and belonging and believing in yourself and realizing that maybe your upbringing wasn't great, and maybe your parents didn't treat you that nice, or maybe you're bullied, or maybe you just felt like shit. But actually, everyone's an amazing human being and we're all unique. And then when and it's so cheesy, isn't it? You've got to love other people, you've got to love yourself. I'm not sure, that sounds kind of like masturbation, but it's like that's true. You've got to be like comfortable, like, and stop being a hungry ghost. Well, that's the term from a book by the name of Gabor Mate, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts.
Yes.
So that was a long answer, but I think I've given it quite a broad.
Yeah, no, you are. And I just
answer.
got I just downloaded that book, actually. I heard you mention it on a podcast. I haven't started it yet. I was meaning to get to it before I spoke to you because I thought it might help with a few things, but I didn't manage to listen to it yet. But was it always sort of in the back of your mind this time? I mean, first of all, it's amazing hearing you talk about the crossover between just life in general and graffiti, because you're exactly right. Everything you're saying makes so much sense. And to be honest, I've never really heard anyone sort of from the graffiti world talk about it that way. I think it's really important, man. It's amazing to hear you talk about it. But was it always sort of in the back of your mind, like, or was there a shift, you know, somewhere along the lines? Like, where did that happen for you, where you started to sort of step back and think about who you were as a person and sort of shedding that idea of a tough guy mentality?
I think there was a couple of occasions that happened. So, you know, where I grew up, it was very much, you know, I got in with a group of pals where it was like, go down the pub on a Friday and act like hard bastards. Like, act like you're Danny Dyer at a football club, bruv, you little fucking sigh. What are you looking at, you little mug? And I'd like go down the pub, I shaved my head, and like I was wearing like Burberry gear, and like, yeah, I'm up for a fucking ruck, yeah, I'm up for it. And like, I just started to realise it was like, this is shit. This is shit. Like getting into punch-ups down the pub with basically randoms, a bunch of other angry young dudes. And I was already doing graph then, but this was like a separate amount of like anger. And then I moved to somewhere called Bristol. So Bristol is a very well-known city in the UK. It's not a huge city. It's got an amazing music history. So people like Ronnie Size, Massive Attack. I mean, Portishead, that's not Bristol. Portishead is actually a little town nearby. But people that are really into good quality music will know who those people are. But also an amazing graph scene that hasn't necessarily had, because there's no train system. Well, there is, but it's a beautiful little local train system that has like 7 stops and only 1 line. I fell in love. I remember I just go and ride that line because it's beautiful. And I remember moving there, and because I was into emceeing and stuff as well, and I got into emceeing, I was like, yeah, you've got to be like a tough guy MC, and like someone tries to get the mic off you, you've got to start a fight with them. And I was still in that. I couldn't even like hug a friend. I didn't hug. I don't think I hugged my dad, or my dad didn't offer to hug me until I was maybe in my 30s. It was like I would never hug my granddad. I would never hug my dad. It was like, I think back and I'm like, that's bizarre, really, but it's very common.
Very common.
And then I started hanging out with mates in Bristol, and I met some mates because one was a DJ and MC, and we're like, yeah, we'll make these amazing albums. You don't. You end up just doing shitloads of MDMA and coke and party for years. But shout out to Frenic and shout out to DJ 2D. So I've had 2D on an episode of Toy Vision and Frenic. Frenic does the majority of the music in the background on Toy Division.
Yeah, for sure, man. Shout out to Frenic, man. That's the beautiful beats.
And they taught me not even consciously, like my mate Dave, like 2D, we get off our tits. And Frenic, we get off our tits, and then they'd like take their shirts off, and then they'd come over and like sit on my lap and like hug me. I remember at first being like, oh, get the fuck off me, yeah? Get off me. What the fuck is this? Like, I'm not gay, yeah? It's like, no, man, we just love you. We just fucking love you, man. We love you. And even just think about it now, it gets me a bit emotional, because it's like, had I never realized that friendships and families, like, it's just about like love. And I'd done, ecstasy, pingers, fucking MDMA, and I'd have those feelings of like, my God, this is like love. Because I got really into drum and bass, and like going to drum and bass raves, I was even scared to dance. Like before I'd gone to a drum and bass rave as an adult or a late age teenager, I couldn't dance. I just felt too on edge. And I'd take a pinger and just be like skanking out to drum and bass. So then meeting those friends, it started to soften and I've heard it described, I see a therapist, and we all talk about like the echidna soup. It's like that prickly sort of like outside layer where it's like defense, but actually it then stops people really getting close to you on like a deep level. And that was a really big thing where it changed my awareness and actually being the empathic, kind person that I am behind that echidna suit, that I always have been, that like caring, empathic person. You couldn't admit that. It's like, I'm empathic, I care about other people. Get the fuck out of this graph scene, mate. You're a wimp. What the fuck are you talking about, mate? Have a drink. And then living in Bristol kind of changed my worldview a lot. I really got into, and again, unfortunately, that was when I then really got hardcore into drugs. So that was a whole other thing. But there was a graph scene there that was so different. Yeah, there was little bits of beef and stuff like that. There's some amazingly skilled artists. Like, I'm going to shout them out, like people like Hacker, Freedom, the real well-known person, CK1, RIP him, a crew DBK, there was PM, there was CM. Anyone that's listening to this from Bristol, they're like, yes! And also there was like TCF, so people like Zimmel, also soccer, like this really amazing West Country scene that was really encouraging. And there was like a couple of spots, and it really made me so passionate about graph. Again, because I was always off my tits, I was doing very little but little pen tags and like street bombing, and I rarely did pieces. But that really changed my view on what graph is. And then I think studying as an occupational therapist, it really taught me about the complexity of what the world is. So people don't really understand what occupational therapy is.
No, do you want to go ahead and explain exactly what that is?
Yeah, I've done that many times. They used to make us literally do elevator pitch 60-second explanations of what occupational therapy is in lectures, because it's one of those professions where people kind of think they know what it is. It's like, oh, is that someone who works with kids with autism? Or is that someone that works in like aged care? Or is that someone that works in like a mental health hospital? Yes, yes, and yes. So here we go. I'll try and keep it under 12 minutes, which I got a 60-second that turns to 12. So occupational therapy, so if I could ask you, I'll flip the question around. When I say occupation, what springs to mind?
Well, what you do for work, I guess.
Yeah, work.
For sure.
Which is an occupation. And I had someone ask me, what would you rename it? I'm like, that's a whole other thing. So occupational therapy, the very brief history is people were coming back from World War I with serious shell shock, aka PTSD. It was then called cowardice because they were executing people for cowardice, which is really fucked, but that's the wonders of the British Army, or the horrors. And people were coming back with serious injuries. Like people had, the wars, because it was such an industrialized war, like the artillery and the machine guns and the bombs and the mustard gas, which was blowing people's arms off, like blowing half someone's face off, like people being blinded, like all these horrendous war injuries. People were coming back from the war, and they needed things like prosthetic limbs and like something to put over their face to like, because they didn't have the technology they have now, like to put something over their face. I don't know if you've ever seen, is it Boardwalk Empire? Or was that Boardwalk?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I don't think I've
mispronounce
seen it.
There's a character in there who's had a face injury and he's a sniper and he has to wear like a mask thing. And it's like that. So that is what occupational therapists, and it was not like a specific profession. It was like they found that if they helped people have like a new arm, a new leg, a thing to put over their face, so you couldn't see, they just got a huge gaping hole in their face. Obviously, that made people feel better. It made them feel more functional, able to do the things they enjoyed. But also, people that were really shocked and traumatized, you know, there's the idea of, oh, it's all about bed rest. Just rest. Just stay there. Don't do anything. Possibly the worst fucking thing you can do, to be honest, because you just literally drive yourself insane. But they found that the people that they ran like, activities with, so say playing a game of cards or doing some painting or the stereotypical basket weaving, because that used to be quite an institutionalized thing that occupational therapists like, weave some baskets because it's good for everybody. And then that's the joke, because I've got a mate who's a mental health nurse and he calls me a basket weaver and I call him a drug pusher. But that's between him and I. So that was where people started to notice that doing things and also helping people to do the things they find meaningful on an individual level was helping their physical and mental health. So those were things that were occupying their time. Therefore, occupational therapy works with people to do the things they need to do, they want to do, or they're expected to do, no matter their physical, emotional, mental, socioeconomic trauma, you know, literally everything that is in life is an occupation. And that took us, because you have to go to uni to study this. This isn't just like an online course you can do in a weekend, which I was a bit gutted about when I found that out, because I was like, I have no qualifications. Well, I've got to go and study at uni for 3 years. And I didn't do that till my late 20s. But what you do is, as an occupational therapist, is, and this is what a good OT does, I'm quite proud to admit I think I'm a good OT, is that you go and work out what occupations are being provided barriers due to the person's mental health, physical health, their home environment, literally the environment, the dynamic between their family, what the actual physical environment looks like. Are they in an institution? Are they in a prison? Are they in a supported living place? Are they under lock and key? And then you work out whether they can tell you or not, or you do complex assessment and observations to help them start living their life. So for some people, it's like, there's a guy I'm working with at the moment who has a profound intellectual disability. Literally, it's just establishing him spending time with someone. We can't even be in the same room. He can get that emotionally overwhelmed.
Wow.
But you know what? Which is really, I'm happy to admit this, he really likes trains. And I'm like, well, I know someone else that really likes trains, but I'm not showing him how to do panels. But that's just an example of, so we spend time and we talk about trains. And I sometimes draw up trains on like his board because I can't be in the same room as him. And that's just developing his opportunity to be interacting with someone. Or it can be a guy that I was working with recently, chronic persistent pain, proper opioid addiction, Vietnam veteran, lost a leg, getting equipment in his house so that he doesn't have to have someone come in and wipe his ass for him. So again, like it's like, this is that Pandora's box of like, what is occupational therapy? And that was way longer than 60 seconds. But then it gives you this idea of analyzing the biological, the psychological, and the social parts of the world and society. And then people then say, oh, well, you talk about graffiti in like quite a deep way. And I'm like, trust me, as soon as I started studying OT, I was like, Graph is the most all-encompassing occupation ever imaginable. Deep breath.
For sure.
But there you go.
Well, it's really fascinating because it sounds like you've obviously applied what you're learning through university and through your work to your love of graffiti, which is, you know, that to me and you, that's obvious, but it's fascinating to hear you talk about that because I guess there are a lot of parallels, and occupational therapy being so broad, why wouldn't you apply what you're learning to your own life? Did your history with mental health and substance abuse and things like that, does that play a benefit in your work?
Yes. in one word answer.
Did you expect it to? Because I'm
Very
interested.
good question.
I'm interested to hear, like, you know, it's like you've got, well, I guess you wouldn't call them parallel lives, but on one side of the coin, you're learning, you know, going to university and learning about these stuff. But on the other side, you're dealing with your own issues, as everyone does. I would assume that it plays a benefit down the track, speaking of now, that you can sort of, one, learn about yourself, but two, also probably understand your clients a lot more because you've been through some of the things that I'm sure you come across. Not all of them, obviously, but I imagine it plays a pretty big role.
Massively. And it's interesting to then think about it. I mean, this is why these are good questions, because I'm so English, I don't even like to give myself compliments, but I get told by clients, I'm like, I've never met a therapist like you, or like the family go, wow, like the way that you work with our son or daughter or my brother or my father, like I've never seen anyone do it like that. And I'm like, I'm just doing what I do. But to answer your question is that I think having been someone where I've been at the lowest of the low points, mental health wise, physical health wise, you know, my chronic pain thing, where I was just so bad, I was like, I wanted to commit suicide over that, and like my hardcore drug abuse and the brain injury I've had, and you know, have harsh beatings, and like growing up in an environment where it wasn't all about like this prim and proper. I didn't just slip out of high school and go to uni and then just get chucked into the real world and be like, whoa, all these patients. Like, it's almost like I've done it in reverse. I've like lived a life and then decided I want to try and help people, and having that understanding of the complexity of the world and what trauma is. And I think the thing which really was a really mind bender for me was I went all the way through uni. We learned about mental health. We didn't really learn about trauma. Then I went and did a training course about what complex developmental trauma is. So long story short, that is the way that our social, environmental and family environment influences our nervous system, our endocrine system, you know, our musculoskeletal system, our brain, our body, all that type of stuff. And I went through a day's training. It was like 2 days, and I was like, I know fucking mental health. Hey, I'm a therapist, mate. I know mental health. I've done mental health placements. I get it. And I got in the car after that first day, and I just cried because I was like, holy shit, I've been through trauma. I didn't realise. And I think that realisation, that idea of like, oh shit, I've been through trauma. Because again, when people say trauma, they think it's like the big T trauma. It's like you've been shot, or you've been in an earthquake, or if it wasn't started by Dan Andrews, that's the myth going around Melbourne. It's like Dan Andrews started the earthquake. All right, fair enough. Whatever. Right, yeah. Right, thanks, Dan. And I think just having that awareness. But to answer your actual question is that I think I can put myself into people's shoes. It doesn't always help, you know, because I work with a lot of people who they get really aggressive for various reasons. Like I work with families where they've got a history of like complex intergenerational trauma. So trauma passed on through the generations on a genetic, psychological and social level. Normally due to the bloody English. You can blame pretty much all the faults in the entire world. I'm not even taking the piss. Like if you trace most of the world's issues back, it's something to do with the English.
You said it, not me, for sure.
Yeah, I'm not saying that as a joke.
No,
like,
yeah, I know.
You know, people are like, oh, you're white shaming. You need to fucking check yourself. Like you're white shaming. I'm like, I'm not shaming my people. My people are white, southern, because the south really fucked up the north of England and Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. And I'm happy to admit that, you know, white, relatively educated English men, we caused so much pain, so much trauma. We've committed genocide. You know, again, France did very similar, and Spain and Portugal, but I don't necessarily think me saying that means that I'm shaming my people. I'm acknowledging and saying, you know what, like we did some fucked up stuff, and then being able to emphasize, yeah, I've got the word wrong. just ranting too much. I forgot what it was. So empathize. Not
Empathy. Yeah, I was trying to think of it myself. Empathize. Yeah.
Screwed up my brain. To empathize with people that have been through that. And I think that maybe a clinician who's not had shit happen in their life, and I'm not saying I've had like the most traumatic life, I'm not saying that, but it's all relative. And having it where I've been at the lowest of the low points, like smoking crack in dingy places and hiding on train tracks, like with helicopters above, or like running or hiding underneath fucking disused train stuff, and I just think that I've always been an empathic person, but then being able to see people's situations, like not just them, but their family, their environment, their culture, their intergenerational trauma. Like one of the things which really always winds me up is when people go, well, you know, no one's alive from that generation now, so let's just get over it. Like, look, no one's alive that was there when the British invaded Australia and took Australia from the indigenous people. So let's just get over that, and we'll give everyone the same opportunities. And if you don't take those opportunities, well, tough shit, you deserve to be poor or drug addicted or whatever. And I'm like, I think that's often not necessarily just being horrible. I think it's just fucking ignorance. So I get so animated and start.
No, I'm out of my.
trying to fix the world. Yeah, trying to fix the world.
Yeah, man.
Through graph.
You mentioned trauma, like big T's and small T's. I did want to ask you, how does someone figure out whether or not the things that they think might have affected them in their childhood or early teens, or how do they figure out whether or not they're actually playing a role? Is there anything that you can suggest people to do to sort of understand whether or not something is affecting them or not?
Very good question. And I think this is a really important one to have, because let's think of the social context. We're taught specifically or implicitly. So explicit is like, so an implicit memory is something we can remember, but implicit memory is something that we can't actually tell. So it's like a sense, because our brain is not all conscious thoughts. So when I talk about explicit and implicit, like explicit is like, oh, you've been in a car crash, or you got sexually assaulted, or you know, your dad beat you up, or like that's an someone's saying that, it's like that's an explicit indication that that's trauma, right? But the implicit component is that we can feel like our body and our brain. It's not just about our conscious thoughts. So that's implicit and explicit. Now, to clarify that is, when we're then taught, get over it, pull up your bootstraps, don't be a wimp, deal with it, don't be a pussy. Like, that's socially conditioning us to think that our emotions and the way that our body feels, we're almost like conditioned. And this isn't just for guys, it's for all people. Ignore how your body feels. And we quickly become disconnected from our body, because a lot of the idea is that the brain and the body are separate systems. No, they're fucking not. You've got the brain, you've got the body that's connected and your internal organs, but you've also got the mind. Now, the mind is something that still we don't understand. And to think we fully understand the body and the brain, that's something I quickly learned when I went into clinical practice. I was like, yeah, we know everything, right? And it's like, no, we really don't. And anyone that says they do, and they use science as a religion rather than as like, science is have a hypothesis, do some testing, analyze the results, and then retest. It doesn't mean you found the answer. Now, that's very important in this context of the world we're living in at the moment, where people are finger pointing and demonizing certain parts of society for whatever their choices are in relation to certain things. I won't say it exactly because everyone knows what I'm talking about. But to go full circle and then actually answer your questions, if you can think of that social conditioning when we're taught, don't listen to your body. Like, we know that our stomach feeling weird is like, oh, I feel sick. Oh, I feel really sick. Okay. Well, you must have allergies. You need to go to the doctors. One of the first signs that we're feeling dysregulated or overwhelmed or emotional is our gut. Like that feeling of like, oh God, I feel really sick. Oh, what is that? And that's actually our body. That's our body giving us signs, like we clench our jaw. You know, I had a client describe it as like, a heart. I felt like his heart was like pumping with energy. But we're conditioned through, and again, this is me then digging a bit deeper. The Western medical model teaches us that our body is a machine, and our body can either be given a tablet or have something replaced through surgery, or it's just in your mind. Well, of course it's in your fucking mind, because everything's in your mind, but everything's also in your body, and they're not separate things. So I'm going pretty deep on this, aren't I?
No, it's good, man.
If you then think about how all that ties together, we're disconnected from how our body feels, right? So that's the first thing we need to recognize. Like, our body gives us very clear cues: sickness, illness, mental health issues. These are signs. This is our body, our nervous system, our brain, all the different systems, our immune system, because the immune and the nervous system are interrelated together. That's why being very stressed can mess up your immune system, and that's why watching the news all the time about a certain subject can really fuck up your mental health, which then makes your more immune system compromised. I've just thrown a folder across the room there by accident. And if we then think about, we're disconnected from that. We're disconnected from feeling that we are part of our body and our brain and our soul and the mind and all this other stuff. But then to actually answer your question is, if we're feeling like our thoughts are just thoughts, or our thoughts are facts, we're not trusting how our body and our inner being is kind of indicating to us that we've been through trauma. Now, trauma for one person can be totally different. Like, trauma for me, I think back to, and I'll just define small t and big T, right? So big T trauma is what you think trauma is. It's what we've been led to believe, that the pop psychology or the media is like being sexually abused, being like neglected as a child, having like parents who are like hardcore drug addicts or alcoholics, or you're in a car crash, or you're violently assaulted, or you're raped, or like, obviously they are horrendous experiences in people's lives, right? They are incredibly, incredibly traumatic. And I am very lucky, other than some very harsh beatings, to not in a car crash. I'm just remembering I was in a 10 car, but you know, those sorts of like the neglect and the time as a child, like I've done a lot of extra training and understanding of what trauma does in childhood. But those are the big T's, right? Little T's, and it's like, have you ever heard the term death by like 100 million thousand cuts, or whatever the term is? Have you heard that one?
Death by 1,000 cuts.
That's essentially, yeah. Small t, like a little lowercase t, is things like feeling like you don't belong in your family, being told you're shit by your parents, being told at school that you're worthless, being ostracized from a group of friends, being bullied, told you look ugly, told you're disgusting, told that no one likes you, no one wants to be friends with you, being beaten up on the way home. Like, and then also racism, sexism, homophobia. Like, I actually consider those quite big T traumas, but they're the kind of things that chip away at how we feel as a human being, because we're not born mentally unwell. We're born the most pure, amazing, like we've been 3D printed. I like this analogy. I tell a lot of parents, like foster parents, because I work with kids who've been taken out of their parents' care, and with foster carers, and a lot of foster carers don't get it. I'm like, we get 3D printed, like in the womb, it's like, just getting 3D printed. Yeah, sweet. All right. Baby pops out. Okay, the hardware's there, been 3D printed, but the software's not there. The software is reliant, and that's the mind. That is reliant on our environment and how we feel and how our parents do or don't treat us, and how the society we live in treats us as like a pure, fresh organism. And I heard it described well as we're born pure and then society beats it out of us. So then, to actually answer your question, because I've gone off on some major tangents, but this is creating this awareness of how complex these situations are, because the medical model has taught us, you're depressed, it's because your serotonin's low. Take some serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Serotonin, I'm not even pronouncing it right. Basically antidepressants. Nothing about, maybe you've lost a job. Maybe you've lost a relationship. Maybe you had a disagreement with someone. Maybe your parents treated you like shit. Maybe like your parents didn't treat you like shit, but the only way you could get like belonging with your family was that you had to achieve things. And then because achieving things was really hard, you started rebelling against that, and then they kind of rejected you. And those small T traumas, those small T traumas build up and build up and build up and build up. And because we're not really in connection with our, and you know, there's all this stuff about mindfulness and meditation, and that's so fucking good. And you can see on the screen now, you've got my little like, the little thing that someone drew for me. And it's like a spray can floating with his fingers like connected.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Like, that's what people,
love it.
that's what, that I'm going to turn that into an ebook to give away to everyone for free. I just need to find the time to do it because I really want to explain this stuff to people. So that's what we think meditation's like eyes closed, floating, like on top of a mountain. I'll be honest, that sounds fucking dope. But it can be that being in connection with our mind and our body and connecting how we feel is actually a real clear sign. So I haven't actually asked your question. But what I would say is, if you and everyone else listening to this, if you're feeling like you're struggling and you're having a tough time, you don't need to prove to yourself that you've been through trauma. You don't need to think, oh, well, you know, someone else has had it worse than me. Like, and I've got a house, I've got a place to live. Like, my family, they like talk to me, and like, I don't want to ever tell people what to do. You don't have to kind of prove to yourself that you need help, because unfortunately what happens is people leave it and leave it and leave it and leave it and leave it. It gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And if we're not having these conversations with our mates, checking in with our mates, listening, that's the biggest thing. I use this quote all the time. Like, I don't want anyone to fix me. I just want someone to fucking listen to me. And that's what a good therapist is. You don't need to be fixed because you're not broken. Brain exploding emoji. So I know I didn't really say what you can and can't use as like an indicator of like, I've been through trauma. What a really good quality therapist doesn't have to be a psychologist. It can be a counselor. It can be an occupational therapist. It can be a healer who uses crystals. I'm not going to judge anyone on that. If you connect with that person and you feel safe and you feel that they're not being judgmental and they fucking listen to you, and they're not telling you that you're wrong or that you're not, you know, get over it. If you start feeling that, move on to someone else. Because there's a lot of good therapists out there who will listen to you and empathize to you. And like I said, we don't need to be fixed because we're not actually broken.
Well said, man, for sure. What about, aside from therapeutic intervention, or, you know, I don't know if that's the right term, dealing with, I guess, the big T's, you know, it would make sense to whatever. I'm not going to speculate on what you should and shouldn't do in terms of big T's, but for little T's, what are some daily practices that people could get involved in that they might not be aware of that actually do help?
Good question. And you've probably picked this up from some of the Toy Division episodes. I'm like, these are the foundations of health. So to make it quite clear, going and seeing a therapist is often seen as the only option that we have. Now, again, every single combination of these things is dependent on the individual, but we're often led to believe that the thing we need to do is we need to go and get a Medicare mental health care plan. We get 10 discounted sessions, and that's for people that are listening in Australia. They know what that, probably know what that is, but anyone that's not, basically you get discounted mental health services, right? So it means you can get them cheaper, and then maybe a GP, because finding a psychiatrist here who's actually not a complete arsehole is actually quite difficult, but I've found a really good one, but I'm not going to tell anyone who it is because I need to keep seeing him. I don't want his waiting list. So sorry about that, everyone. Often we're led to believe it's like, go and talk to someone, do CBT, take some antidepressants or take some stimulants, depending on what you get diagnosed with, fixed. Again, you're not fucking broken, right? You're not broken. But what we need to do is we need to then realize that those are the things we can do. Seeing a therapist, taking medication, again, they're tools, right? They're tools that we can use to improve our health and wellness. Now, health and wellness seems like something that, what's her name? What's the lady who does that goop stuff? What's her name? Married the guy out of Coldplay, and it's everyone just takes the piss.
No idea.
Gwyneth Paltrow.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you're like, how the fuck do you know about Coldplay, Mr. TD, you knobhead? No, I've never listened to it, honestly. And health and wellness has been like hijacked. Yeah, it's all about like I'm a CEO of a company, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm working in Silicon Valley, and I go and have my cryotherapy chamber and have organic food delivered to me through my arse or something like that. And that's just marketing. Like, but what we can do is we can realize that there's the foundations of health. So to break that down, break this right down, simple. Let's keep it simple, mega simple, because as you can probably tell, I've been got off on tangents. Like, what can we start doing today? What can we start doing? So, the foundations of health, and I have to remember this because I end up forgetting one of them, which is really poor considering. Okay, so sleep. Let's start on sleep. Like, sleep is the most important thing for your physical and mental health now and in the future. Like, no question, it is. Now, I'm not going to explain why. But as we know from a lot of cultures, I sleep when I'm dead, sleep's for losers, don't rest. Like, I've done episodes about actually how complex sleep is, and I neglected my sleep for decades. I was up all night doing uppers and downers and lefters and righters and upside downers and like not sleeping. I was fucking mentally fucked. But not only now, but as we get older, sleep issues, doing night shifts, staying up all night has been found to actually be one of the reasons why people get dementia and like diabetes. And like, think of sleep as the free of charge time for your body to literally rejuvenate, recycle. And there's actually evidence now from the neuroscience that parts of your brain fluid that builds up during the day with the reactions of your neurotransmitters and hormones, it builds up oxidative waste and those types of things. You need to go into a deep sleep for that to actually open up and to be flushed out. It's like, again, a great book, and I always like to recommend books to people because I think understanding, even if you're not much of a book reader, just start reading books, mate, because it changed my life. I was like, books for fucking wimps. It's like, nah, it's not. The only thing is now I'm addicted to writing books and have like 1,000,000,001 books and I haven't read them all. But a really good book to read is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. So that's the foundation. When we talk about sleep, the problem is that the medical model has taught us that you can force yourself to sleep. So you take like a sedative, Ambien, that messes your sleep. But we are biological beings that are in synchronized with circadian rhythms, so the light-dark cycles. So anyway, if anyone wants to know more about that, there is an episode of Toy Division all about sleep. So go and check that out. Also, so sleep, that's the foundation. Now, what then can be influenced by sleep is, number one, movement and or exercise. Now, for a long time, there wasn't the research evidence as to why exercise was helpful. It was kind of seen as like, well, people that exercise probably aren't depressed anyway, so why would that influence anything? Now, incorrect, because people have obviously wanted to work this shit out, because medication can help, but what about stuff that can be free of charge to some degree, unless you go to a class or whatever? Now, with exercise, it's been found that it actually produces neurotransmitters and hormones, and it changes the way it releases something called myokines, which is like positive, not cytokines, not the negative ones, which are chucked all over Fox News or Sky News is like the end of the world. Myokines are positive feel-good proteins. They travel up to your brain. They stimulate something called the glial cells. And the glial cells create something called neurotrophic factors. Now, the most common, well-known one is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's being identified, that's like fertilizer for your fucking brain. You can actually create new brain cells and new synapses, which is the connection between the neurons, which are the brain cells. So you can actually literally like create new parts of your brain. So that's movement and exercise. And when we say exercise, let's not think about it as exercise has to be a marathon or an Ironman or something really complex. Going for a walk, taking a flight of stairs instead of the elevator, cycling, like literally anything, even using a stand-up desk. I'm going to admit something here, a bit embarrassing, but I don't care. I've got a walking desk. Doesn't mean the desk actually walks. I've got a treadmill at my desk.
Really?
Yeah.
Solid.
It's really confusing at first. I nearly fell over a few times. But I've got a thing, it folds away in the cupboard so I can put it away when people come round to like, you've actually lost your mind. But that's
genius, man.
Yeah, well, I didn't come up with it, mate. I stole it off one of those people I was taking the piss out of, the CEO of influencers. But that's that movement. We were built to move. We evolved hunting, gathering, fetching things, moving around. That's what is one of the things which probably made our brains so complex. Because being on a treadmill, that's cool, that's good. But doing an activity where you're mimicking, finding something or hunting something, or like doing something where you're actually doing an activity, which is why it crosses over into graph. Like if you can at the spot, like take the spot where you've got to climb up things or climb up a ladder, or like obviously safely, but try and challenge yourself. So movement and exercise. So sleep, movement and exercise. Now, the one which we kind of brushed over was meditation, mindfulness, but I would like to describe that as relaxation, regeneration. Now that can be engaging in things that you enjoy, which is why graph can be such an amazing thing. Sketch, draw, learn how to use InDesign and try and make a magazine like I'm doing at the moment with no experience doing it. And like, why did I think this was a good idea?
Oh, that's a Pandora's box in itself.
Yeah. Thankfully, a person who runs a very well-known Australian magazine kindly has helped me out a lot. So shout out to him. But being able to have that like meditation, mindfulness, do some breath work. The most simple thing I teach to clients is box breathing. So it's like in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. That's breath work. Do that. And that's not like someone's made that up and it's like, oh, that's just, and okay, it does come from Buddhist and yogi type practice. The fucking Navy SEALs do that when they're about to go into combat. So if a bunch of people with machine guns can use it to be less scared, not that I'm talking about the horrors of war, but like that's a sign that it's quite regulated. Now, the final component part, and this is where it's the minefield of ideological, ethical, emotional, climate change thinking, is food and drink choices. Now, let's not go into a debate about this is the best food and that's the best food and red meat is bad for you and veganism is the best or only meat. Like that, people can argue about that on fucking Facebook and Instagram. That's fine. What I would suggest is, if anything's in a box or packaging and it's got an ingredients list on it, that's probably processed foods. Now, not to say everything, but what we've had is that the food supply has become processed foods that are addictive. They are a drug. They change your biological and your neurological function because they want you to keep fucking eating it. They have whole teams that find what's called the bliss point, the perfect fat, sugar, and salt, because that doesn't exist in nature. It's not the only thing that does. This is always a bit creepy. Well, not creepy, but the only thing in nature that does have that in it is breast milk.
Wow. Yeah, of course.
Because they want it's like there's another factor. People, the baby needs to keep like breastfeeding. And how to make it really appealing? Make it like a really mind-bendingly good Snickers ice cream or like a thing of Pringles. Now, when I then talk about that is, and again, this is a whole other subject, and again, we know what drink choices means because alcohol, again, it's deeply entrenched into our cultures and a lot of Western cultures. It's seen as like the norm, but it messes with our sleep. It messes with our neurotransmitters. That first sip of that pint is like GABA. There's the down regulator of GABA. So obviously we're using those as coping strategies, but in general, try and eat good quality whole foods. That means foods that are like vegetables, nuts, seeds, meat if you do or don't want to eat meat. Again, the evidence behind meat being this planet destroying thing is actually quite scarce, and actually a lot of the ideological and ethical parts start to come in there. But just try and eat food. Like, don't eat shitty takeaway. Like, I was reading a research paper the other day all about how it's been known for a long time that the packaging of fast food, Burger King or Hungry Jack's here, McDonald's, Domino's, all those types of places, mate, they've actually got carcinogenic chemicals in the packaging. So when you're eating that, not only is it like crappy ingredients, and they've probably got the meat from somewhere where they've just cut down 1 billion and one trees, like there's actually carcinogenic chemicals in the packaging. Now, if we then think about that all tied in together, so just to recap, sleep, food and drink choices. And I've done episodes on these, so I know I keep promoting Toy Division, but maybe if people start listening, they'll be like, oh, I haven't talked about that. Because these are big, these are whole episodes on their own.
For sure, man. No, people should definitely go and listen to those.
And if they want to sign up as a Patreon or a patron, there's extra, but that's another sales pitch. So sleep, food and drink choices, meditation, mindfulness, movement and exercise. Now, they're things that we can control. And a lot of them, food's not free, I know that. But sleep is fucking free. Going for a walk is free. Doing some press-ups is free. And I know that that's not for everyone. But these are the things we can start doing. But what's really important is we tie all that together and we realise that belonging, purpose, and meaning, those are the unmeasurable things which make us feel connected in the giant collective consciousness that is being a human. We evolved in groups. We need to feel like we're part of a group. And the whole thing is, if you don't use it, you lose it. Now that applies to, as we get older, gravity wins the race. It basically just bends us forwards and our muscles, ligaments and tendons basically just give up the fight. But if you do resistance training, as in lifting weights or lifting a load or doing pull-ups or whatever, like any against a load, you can stop that downward spiral of being that frail old person. If you do meditation and mindfulness, even if it's one box breathing, you can do these things. But having that connection, associating with people who are on a similar mindset, getting into your 70s and 80s, the blue zones, they find that one of the most common variables is that people in those communities, which is where there's a lot of centenarians, so people over 100 years old, all those things I've just spoken about, like not super stressed, when they do meditation, mindfulness, they have belonging, they eat well, they sleep well, they have a little bit of alcohol, but not going mad, crazy benders. And I think I didn't realize any of that stuff. But now that is like the foundation of keeping myself well. And before trying to blame or find a cure, I think, am I actually dealing with my sleep well? Am I eating well? Have I been drinking Stellas and doing lines of Coke? Probably not that great for my mental health. And then if we tie it all together is that there's so much information out there, but just be careful of people that are trying to be gurus or quick solutions. It takes work. Now, I don't want then to put people off, and I don't want to say, oh, it's your responsibility, because that's that neoliberal sort of like, well, if you don't do it, then it's your own fucking fault. But start to get a bit more educated. Listen to podcasts like this, like maybe check out some Toy Division stuff. Like go online. There's a lot of information out there, but try not to sign up to gurus or the know-it-all, because I continuously learn every day. I read books, I read research papers, because I'm now so passionate about knowing, but I know I'll never know everything. And being able to then be like, ask for advice, ask for some help, that can really get us so far. And if we've got those foundations, the majority of the research says that those 4 underlying component parts of health, physical and mental, because they're not separate, they are the same thing, they are one and the same, but also that belonging, that culture, that meaning, if we can keep that going, and that's why I think graph can be so positive, it can be mega negative, but we can get all those things out of it. And just keep that in mind and, go and find information, but connect with other people that are of a similar mindset and want to improve their physical and mental health. And I'm not saying don't hang out with people because they do loads of drugs. I hung out with loads of people who did drugs, and I did loads of drugs myself. But you know what? I'm so happy I've now broken free from that, and I actually can feel times of calm and actually not just terrified and scared and angry all the time. So that was a very long answer, as always. My answers are never short.
No, they don't need to be, man. I think it's really informative, man. I was really interesting to hear you talk about all those things and break it down. Again, it's you seem to break it down in a sort of digestible way, which is really, really good for someone like me who likes to have things sort of laid out in front of them, because I can get lost a little bit in the complexities of everything. Before I know it, I'm going down 10 different rabbit holes at once, and then I just think, oh, this is too much, and sort of give up on it. What kind of, all those things you mentioned, what is your sort of weekly regime? Do you plan your week out in terms of your food and exercise and things like that? Or do you just sort of subconsciously try to incorporate all those things into your life?
Okay, so to give a bit of context, and I will try and not go off on a mega tangent again, because I know we're running at nearly 2 hours here, but I think this is important to be aware of. So I got into fitness and stuff like that. Again, the other things I was talking about, like the childhood insecurities and things like that, and I started to get really self-esteem. Unfortunately, I then developed an addiction to exercise and an eating disorder. Now, that's not talked about with guys. It's like bulimia, anorexia, that's for girls, man. That's for girls. But one of the things I really promised myself is, especially now in the last couple of months, is like, I'm not saying, look, oh, be sorry for me, I had an eating disorder. But I'm like, I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed. I got mocked at the time. I tried to tell a very close friend and he was like, fucking sort yourself out. What are you talking about? And it's like, thanks, mate. I'll obviously come to you again for emotional support. Fucking go over it. But I became very, very regimented, very regimented. I was over-exercising. I was literally planning my meals. Back when I thought calories or counting calories was like the be-all and the end-all, actually calories are just a measurement of energy when you put a ton of food into a massive barometer heater and see how it gets to go to boiling point. And most food packaging actually doesn't even do that anymore. They just estimate from figures. So calories is not bullshit. And there was people that will lose their fucking mind if you indicate it's not the be-all and end-all. But I was trying to, because I was single, I was a bit mentally unwell, I was not drinking, I was doing my stuff. Anyway, so I became massively over the top about it. I was exercising too much. I was going to the gym like twice a day, cycling to uni, doing self-defense training, like only eating like certain calories. Because I thought it was like, yeah, move more, eat less, move more, eat less. And then I just got to the point where I'd then like binge eat and I'd feel guilty and then I'd like throw it up. So I was basically getting bulimia, right? It's like, oh, a guy admitting that. But trust me, it happens a lot. And we don't need to stigmatize this shit because enough men are killing themselves because they can't feel like they can talk about their emotions. So I'm putting it on the line. I'm putting that on the line and people are like, oh, this Toy Division goes, fucking pussy, fucking.
Yeah, fuck
it's like,
them, no. All power to you, man.
I don't care. Like, I'm not saying to come and fight me, but I'm all like, let's chat about it. Like, I'll sit down with you. Like, I'm not some, and again, not judging people. I'm not the kind of person who's like really softly spoken, as you can probably tell. Like, oh, I don't, like, mate, if you want to come and give me shit, I probably won't try and fight you these days because I don't really up for fighting because it doesn't get us anywhere. But I'm not scared to admit who I am as a human being. So to then ask the question, I said I wasn't going to go off on the tangent. Famous last words. So what I do now is I've incorporated so essentially, long story short, what I realized was that I was overdoing it. So it can be very easy to like overdo something. Like going for a run, that works. But then it's not having as much benefit, so you do more. Or eating healthy is good and it makes you feel good, but it's not getting the results, so you feel like you need to do it more. So it's the human thing of like more is better. Now, I then realized that, stepped back, because I had all the chronic pain stuff. I got into this very slow form of resistance training called HIIT, so high intensity training, not high intensity interval training. That's very much about slowly lifting weights of any type, very, very slowly, slow back. So minimal. And I also used to spend hours in the fucking gym. And I realized I don't really want to do that. Like, I don't want to sustain that. So basic thing I do every day is, and this is a protocol, people can take this and do with it whatever they want. It works really well for me. I make sure that I get to bed at a reasonable time because preparing for the next day is important. So I wear blue light blocking glasses. I've changed the light bulbs in the house so they're not these blue, because most light bulbs are LED lights that are constantly flickering, screens. It gives the blue light. So we're almost preparing for the next day the night before. If you prime your sleep routine, you try and go to bed not at some crazy late hour, like some people, hardcore, when the sun goes down. I can't do that. I like Netflix too much, and Disney Plus. Shout out to Disney Plus. What I try and do is I try and think about it the night before. I don't set an alarm clock. I'm lucky with that. I don't have to get up at a certain time for work, but I naturally wake up quite early. So first thing I do is, if I'm struggling to get out of bed, because I'm sure a lot of people have that, that feeling of like, oh, fuck, I've got to do this, or like crazy wild thoughts, or like, oh, it's too much, like, oh. And that's normally a real warning sign for me with like depression and anxiety, and it's really debilitating. And that's a real warning sign now. I don't know if people know who Wim Hof is. So he's often sees like the ice man, not meth man, like ice as in cold water.
Sure, man, he's a
going
legend.
out do this. Oh, mate, but there's a type of breathing he does called tumo breathing. Now, I won't do it on here because it's really people wearing headphones and they're just hearing like, but essentially it's 25 to 30 in breaths, in out breaths. So I'll just do it really quick. It's like, okay, so you do that 25 to 30. And on the last breath, you go, and then you just hold your breath. Now, people are thinking, what the fuck is this guy going on about? But the neuroscience behind it, and we're not talking about at least airy fairy. That's a terrible term. That's really, we're not talking about bullshit here. See, there's the old terminology there, still in my brain.
Still coming through.
Social conditioning. Yeah. Don't be a this, don't be a that. So, that actually increases the amount of dopamine and norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is brain adrenaline. Now, dopamine is often what you really need to get out of bed, to be driven, to do things, to achieve things. And when we're feeling low, our levels of dopamine and norepinephrine, so brain adrenaline, it's just adrenaline, but it's in the brain, that's increased. Now, so I do that. If I'm struggling in the mornings, I'll do that once or twice. And then literally I feel like I get energy. I get up. I normally fast most days up until about lunchtime. That's both for like mental health, physical health. If people want to look into fasting, just be careful, don't go too extreme, because again, someone with a history of an eating disorder, it can be a slippery slope. I make myself black coffee. I normally chuck in an element, LMNT, which has got sodium, potassium, magnesium, which is great electrolytes. This is taking me a long time to get this routine. I didn't just suddenly start doing this. And then I get outside within 10 minutes to an hour after waking. Now, the reason why you want to do that is, again, remember how I said you prepared the night before for the next day. What you're doing is you're then wanting to reduce the amount of brain chemicals. I won't go into specific neurotransmitters and hormones, but you've got your, So melatonin is sleep. Cortisol is being awake. Cortisol is often seen as like stress, but stress can be good and it can be bad, but different types. Get outside in sunlight. Now, don't stare at the fucking sun. Don't be a Donald Trump, because that'll just mash up your eyes and you'll burn your flipping retinas out. But get outside, even if it's a cloudy day, even if it's crappy weather. If you can get outside, I take my glasses off because I normally wear glasses or contact lenses, don't wear sunnies or whatever. Get out there, 10 to 15 minutes of sunlight. So I go out, this is my morning routine. I've got the black coffee with the element in it. Maybe I chuck a bit of brain octane oil in it, which is an MCT oil. Anyway, going off on tangents. My cat often wants to get outdoors, so I go out with her. She kind of mills around in the garden. I get out there. I let the sun go into my eyes. I don't stare. That's then going to increase your cortisol. It kickstarts the whole process. So I was talking about how you prepare the night before for the morning after. The morning after, you're then preparing for that night. So that's circadian rhythm, okay? And then I'll go for a walk. Now, that sounds simple. Get out the door, go for a walk. I don't always want to, but I'm definitely enjoying doing that here in Melbourne because I can just walk down laneway after laneway after laneway after laneway, and it's like graff, 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 graff. But just trying to get outside and go for a walk, that's really important for me. And then I come back and I do a cold shower. Now, again, all these things are to increase the dopamine and the norepinephrine and to increase the feelings of energy, because that's what I really struggle with. I have been diagnosed with ADHD. People will then go, yeah, no shit. But I didn't get diagnosed until my late 30s, like last year. So sometimes I do take my dexamphetamine tablets, but I'm also very much wanting to help my brain in more, how can I say, natural, but using my lifestyle to improve my physical and mental health. Now, that's my morning routine. Now, I can then go into I do resistance training and I do cycling and, I then do fasting and But if someone can just do that, I would suggest to someone, go for a walk in the morning. If you can, just please just get outdoors. And I know that's not always possible for everyone, because depending on where we live and, all that type of stuff, but going out and getting a walk is really important. And if I can remember, because it's easy to forget, also write a gratitude journal. So that's something I've just got back into because I had a real slump in my mental health due to lockdown and being in ISO and all the shit that's happening with COVID. but I've got back now into that morning routine. And the gratitude journal, people think, oh, it's just writing a journal. Now, if you then want to geek out, look up the neuroscience and the psychology literature about how changing our perspective on literally our life, our situation, switches the neurotransmitters and the hormones that are released. So long story short, my gratitude journal is, one, I write something I'm grateful for. So it's like, I am grateful that I have a house to live in and I have food to eat, because a lot of people don't in the world, right? Simple. Something I'm working on, it might be getting that fucking Toy Division episode edited that I've been trying to do for ages and keep forgetting about it, because it brings me meaning, right? That's working on, and then looking forward to. So this is like the cherry on top. And I put in there today, I'm looking forward to hopefully being able to see the new Dune movie at the cinema, because I love the book and it will bring me joy, right? Simple shit, right? That's been linked to actually change the way your brain is fucking wired. So I could go on about this for ages, and I know we're getting close to like 2 hours.
Yeah, no, for sure, man. No, that's really, and it's exactly what I was hoping you'd break down, because I think a lot of people will find a lot of value in hearing you just sort of explain some simple things that they can do. I certainly did, that's for sure. Yeah. I did want to ask you before I let you go, specifically about addiction, and I don't know if it's something that you're fully across, or that obviously you've had experience with it yourself. And I guess this question is kind of selfish in a way that I'm more curious. I'm not sure how valuable it would be to someone listening, but I've had issues with addiction in the past, and in some ways I still do today.
Me too. Not the Me Too movement.
Yeah. Me too. And yeah, to me, it's just so hard for me to wrap my head around it. I think about it a lot, and it's sort of on my mind constantly. And I seem to fluctuate between different things over long periods of time, and it's not really this cut and dry sort of black and white situation. It's as I said, it's hard to wrap my head around. Sometimes I find it shifting into positive things like physical training. So I go through these cycles every maybe 2 years. I'll get into fitness, and I'll get so, I'm training like I'm going to the Olympics. Like, it's crazy. It just consumes me, and I get really fit. And obviously that's a positive thing. I feel great. My mental health is always sort of, as far as I can tell, on a pretty good path at that point. And I, for whatever reason, always fluctuate between that and then just sort of dropping it and just walking out of the gym one day and not going back. My question is addiction something that we need to fix, or is it something that we need to sort of exploit and shift it into a positive thing like physical training or creativity? I'm not sure if you can, I'm not sure.
No, I can. Because you're like, I'll let you go, mate. I could do like Joe Rogan length episodes. I just know that people's brains switch off after like 2 hours. So,
sure. Okay, does that make sense though? What I'm saying?
100%. Because I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people, and I think it's common. Is like, I'm an all or nothing sort of person.
For sure.
So it's either
Likewise.
like I'm not drinking, I'm cycling, I'm like doing loads of like really meaningful work, I'm really on the ball, I'm sleeping well. And something happens, and I slowly like get back into like drinking every night, and then it's every weekend, and then I'm like getting a bag in as well, because I have one of those brains where, and there's no such thing as, there's people say, oh, I've got an addictive personality, or that person's got an addictive. There's no such fucking thing as an addictive personality. Everyone has the potential to build up a habit which is actually impacting their quality of life. That's basically what an addiction is. An addiction is not like weak-willed or like a personality flaw or like something wrong with your brain. Okay, it's then being described as, it's a sickness. And to some degree, I kind of agree with that, but I don't like that, because then that indicates that it's something that is really fucking wrong with you, because society is like demonized addicts of certain types. But you can be a workaholic, right? You can be a workaholic. That's celebrated. You can be a heavy drinker and maybe a powder cocaine user in a lot of social groups. It's like, yeah, fucking yeah, celebrated, yeah, getting all the bags, yeah, fucking what a crazy party lad. If you're in an alleyway smoking meth or injecting meth, it's like, you piece of shit. Oh, you're disgusting, you're scum. You're the problem with society. You deserve to go to jail or be beaten to death or die on the road or whatever. Like, again, there's this whole social context to all the things we consider. However, addictions are one of those things where we are getting something out of it that is helping us to feel safe and calm and regulated. Now, you can put that down to the neurological neurochemistry. So literally, like, cocaine increases your dopamine, so you feel more driven, or meth really increases your dopamine and you feel amazing until the downside. So they're like those floods. And that's the thing, is there's obviously differences between recreational and pharmaceutical drugs, but most of them have similar attributes. They're just actually not just full of fucking brick dust and like rats' brains. And, well, I hope not. And if we then think about that, is that drive, that ability to think, okay, I get into this, like, it's like the fitness thing. If we think about, what does that provide, right? Well, what do you get out of when you're doing the exercise? If you think, and I'm putting you on the spot here, but like, what sorts of emotions and feelings do you have when you're like you're going to the gym, you're doing stuff, you're eating well, you're sleeping well? How does, what does that, you don't have to go too deep into it. This isn't actually a therapy session, but how does that make you feel?
Well, first of all, I think, just to rattle off a few: confidence, energy, just positive thoughts. My mind's pretty sort of chattery throughout the day, just to myself. It seems to clear a lot of that up. I just feel like I could deal with adversities better if something was to go wrong. If I'm in a good frame of mind and I'm feeling physically fit, I feel like when the day comes, when bad shit happens, small or big, I feel like confident that I could handle it. And that's probably contributes to the confidence that it just gives you, throughout your daily life. But just feeling good, man. You just feel sort of ready for the day, ready to handle things, I guess would be the best way to put it.
And you've just kind of given the clear example there that you're in a calm, regulated, emotionally well state. That lifestyle habit has brought to you feelings of wellness, like health and wellness. Like, it's not just Gwyneth Paltrow products. Like, you feel calm and regulated, you feel well, your body is rewarding you for doing those activities, you're getting those positive feelings. Now, if we then think about, it's not just the neurochemical or the neurological or the physical attributes of habits or addictions, because an addiction is an addiction where it's something which is impacting on your ability to do the other things. Like exercise, okay, it's great, but if you're doing it all the fucking time, like I got into a phase where I would not go out and hang out with friends because I was too busy going to the gym.
Sure, yeah.
That was when I thought, shit, I've got an addiction here. But then if we flip that onto drugs, alcohol, shopping, pornography, again, another subject which people don't talk about, like that internet pornography is a serious fucking problem, but we don't have time for that. These addictive things, they are not necessarily just the activity or the addiction or the drug and a friend of mine summed it up really well. So he used to come and pick me up. Shout out to him. I will send him this episode, so he'll be listening to it. I know he listens to Toy Division. He used to come pick me up in his, now he's just left it. He left his old Mercedes at Sydney Airport when he went abroad, rather than get rid of it. It's like, just left it at the no parking zone. Yeah. Amazing. Shout out to that guy.
Someone go and get it.
Yeah, someone will just scrap it. Great. And he used to just come pick me up in his Mercedes. His old, he's amazing, like the beast. And we just drive around. He'd take me to all these cool spots in Sydney. It was like amazing. Like, it just take me to these like drain spots and stuff, and we paint a lot. Anyway, and I remember one time he was asking me really good questions about addiction and that sort of stuff. And he knows I'm a bit of a nerd and I've got experience with it. And I explained to him that often it's seen that the drug is the thing that makes you addicted. But actually, it's us that makes the drug or the Instagram or the shopping or the pornography. And that's not when we consciously make it, but he came up with, so it's not the drug that hooks you, it's you that hooks the drug. I was just like, so to then answer your actual question, being able to identify what might be contributing to us feeling not 100%. Like I said earlier, you said, I don't know if I've been through trauma. I'm not quite sure. You're kind of like questioning how much you might need help, but start to be aware of the warning signs, which is what I always suggest to people. And this is definitely something which I do now, didn't used to. It's like, it's the warning signs here. Like, I don't want to go to the gym. Main thing is I'm a mega social person, right? If I don't want to go out and paint and hang out with people, I'm like,
something's up.
This is a bit of a warning sign. It's like a red flag. And then what you can do is once we start to become aware of those, and that's the thing is I think it scares people when they have their first period of like major anxiety or a panic attack or depression or maybe a psychotic episode. They're like, oh, fuck, this is it. I'm fucking screwed for the rest of my life. Oh, God. Unfortunately, I've been through so many of those types of episodes through my life. I'm so used to them. Like, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me saying this. My now wife, she didn't have any clear anxiety or mental health problems. Like, she'd been through a lot of trauma, never realised it until she was in like her late 20s. And she was so terrified that it was going to last forever. And that was it. It was like a life sentence. But what's really important is the more times you go through it, and obviously going through it is fucking horrible. Like those deep bouts of depression or addiction or self-hate or shame or guilt or all those horrible things we go through, the more times you go through it, if you're able to kind of think, okay, this is the warning sign, you can start to notice those warning signs. You can start to notice those red flags. And I really like the analogy. I think it's by someone by the name of Ruby Wax. She's a really, anyway, probably people won't know who she is. Anyway, and she came up with, because she's had long periods of manic depression, so what's sometimes called bipolar, but again, that's just a diagnosis, it doesn't define a person. And when she starts to notice the things which are probably like the warning signs, she's like, I treat it like I'm on a ship that's heading towards a storm. And what do you do when you're on a ship? I don't know, I've never been on a ship in a storm. I'm not saying I've been in the Navy or anything, or I'm this swashbuckling, that's how I got to Australia, I just got an old boat.
Aye, Captain.
I Captain Toy Division. The analogy she has, you batten down the hatches, you get ready, and you weather the storm. Because the storm will pass, and you will then be able to open up the hatches and enjoy the scenery and the view. And I remember her saying that, and I was like, that's powerful.
That's beautiful.
Because if you realize that these things, they come and they go. Like, I don't even have, and I've had this discussion with my wife. She's like, do you ever get worried that you're going to get mentally ill again? And I'm like, no, because I just have had it so many times now. I don't worry about it. And that doesn't mean I'm like, I'm this fucking amazing, but I don't get worried at all. I don't get scared I'm going to get depressed. When I get depressed, I have like, and I know anyone that's listening to this, like most of us, virtually everyone that's listening to this will have had anxiety and depression, may not realize it, but it's horrendous. It's fucking horrendous. You're like, I can't see past that moment. You're like stuck in this fog of like, oh God. But things can and will get better, and you will be all right. And also, hopefully there's people around you that will empathize and listen to you and be aware that that's, again, it's that whole thing is you don't need to be fixed because you're not broken. And also, I'm just taking a deep breath because I really do believe this point is that we don't want anyone to fix us. We just want someone to listen.
Well said, man. Really well said. Look, man, you've, something about me starting this podcast, in some ways, I think it was just a selfish sort of way of being able to talk to people and have meaningful conversations. And this is one of those conversations that I'm really grateful and thankful that I started this, because had I not, I would have never sort of sat down with many people for an hour or two and had a good chat, let alone speak with you about some of the really interesting topics we've discussed today. So it's, I'm really grateful, and I can't thank you enough, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to do it. And also you not telling me to shut the fuck up.
No, man.
Because I always get worried I overtalk.
You've got you've got a skill, man. You've really got a knack for getting your point across and speaking clearly. And, I could sing your praises for the next 20 minutes, but I think what you've done with Toy Division, man, I really respect. And from what I've heard from other people as well, you're providing a lot of value around graffiti and around mental health and all these things that aren't often discussed, man. So you're really doing it a service, and it's awesome, man.
Thank you. And that means a lot. And I just want to shout out every single person that listens to this, every single person that listens to Toy Division. And last thing I promise I'll say is, if you're feeling low, if you're feeling separated from everyone else, if you're feeling like there's no way out, please, please, please reach out to someone, or try and talk to someone. Or if you get the inkling that your mate's not in their usual mood, you don't have to call them and like tell them how to live their life. Just drop them a text. Like, one of my biggest regrets is that I had a friend who I grew up with, and he became very mentally unwell. And first time I went back to England after I moved here, I wanted to go and see him, and he was in hospital, and I called him and he didn't pick up, and I knew which hospital he was in, and I was like, no, I'll just see him again soon. It never came round to it. I got back 3 days later, he'd committed suicide, and that troubled me so much. Like, rest in peace, Bruce. Rest in peace, Stephen. I'm just getting emotional thinking about it. But like, the thing that I really love is he was so into graph. Every piece I'm painting for him, I know he'd be in the background going, yes, this is sick. Yes, I can't wait. So that's what I'm trying to say, is like, reach out, talk to somebody, and realize you're not alone. You're not a busted robot. You're a human being that needs help. And there is people out there to help you. And I'd rather be painting a wall with you than painting a wall in your memory.
Fucking oath, man. Rest in peace to your friend Bruce, bro, for sure. Can you?
Anyway, I've taught you fucking ears off.
No, man, bro, trust me, I'm fucking loving. This is probably the best. Well, not probably. This is definitely the best conversation I've had in a long time. And even though I didn't do a lot of talking, man, I've really enjoyed it. Can you tell people? You know, it's probably obvious, but can you tell people where to find you online?
Yeah. So there is 2 Instagrams, but I got locked out of the other one for a couple of reasons. And Facebook, it's not really called, it's Meta now, isn't it?
Metaverse.
The Metaverse. Welcome to Zuckerberg's nightmare dystopian future. Come join me in the Metaverse. Check out Toy Division 2. So literally Toy Division the number 2 on Instagram, because the other one, I was locked out of it, which was really fucking frustrating because I built up tons of followers, but I know it's not that. And that was a reminder of like how futile that sort of thing is. I'm actually thinking about shutting that Instagram down because the censorship and bullshit of social media, but maybe I'm an Instagram
It's good
addict.
for exposure though, don't you think?
Yeah, 100%. And also the people that I can then, like, I'm not ashamed to admit, for the 60th episode, I did a Style Wars episode, and I was messaging people that were in Style Wars, like, yo, can you do an interview with me? Most of them just ignored me. One of them said yes, and it never happened. I know people have heard me say that, and they're like, you sounded wounded. But someone like Quick got back to me. He's like, yo, thanks for the message. At the moment, I'm really not feeling able to talk about it because of the stuff that's happening in the US at the moment, but I really hope everything's great for you, and thanks for pushing the culture. So it's like, without Instagram, I wouldn't have had that. But if people then want to actually listen to Toy Division, I've tried to put it on as many different platforms as possible. So iTunes, Spotify, Podbean. I literally manually put them on, and we're up to about 76, 77 episodes. So check them out. And and the other thing is that people often send me like a nice message on the Instagram, and that's cool. I'm happy. I may not respond because I don't want to sound like, oh, I get so many, I'm amazing, but I often forget to respond. But I normally try and leave a voice message back, because I think just saying thanks, cool, I'll just say thank you, and people go, oh my God, I can't believe the person in Toy Division spoke. I'm like, I'm just a human being who talks shit. So anyway.
No, it is nice to get a response, man. I've hit up people just, you know, throwing shit into the wind, like there's no way this person's going to get back to me. And sure enough, they're like, hey man, what's up? And you're just like, Jesus Christ, this is powerful.
Or they go, yeah, I listened to it. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
Shit, someone actually listens to this.
Yeah.
All right, mate. Well, thanks so much, mate. And just to knock the ball back into your side of the court, keep up the stuff you're doing. I've been really enjoying the podcast episodes, and we need more of this grown-up, mature conversations about a culture that means so much to so many of us around the world.
Thank you for listening to the Lead Poison Podcast.